Today, I'm not a parent, but I kind of feel like a proud parent today because we have one of our own, Annette Wong, who actually was the student leader of Spirit of the Law last year. She's been seminal in getting the series off the ground and in sort of giving it a profile at the law school and on our university campus. She just graduated from USC last year, and she's going to tell us about her experiences in Cambodia and her plans for the future. I'm really grateful to her for being here, for visiting us and sharing her experiences with us. And I'm going to ask our current student president of Spirit of the Law, Jennifer Park, to come up and introduce her friend, Annette. So let's hear it for Jennifer.
Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, Annette Wong, who is a former student Spirit of the Law president and also a personal friend. So before coming to USC, Annette studied history and international studies at Yale, where she was named the 2008 Foro Fellow in Public Affairs. It was only a few months ago that Annette was sitting in this very classroom. In fact, she was in some of my classes. But today, she's here to share how she's using her law degree to fight grave injustices halfway around the world. You see, for the past 3 months, she has had the chance to be in Phnom Penh, where she's been working with the Supreme Court Chamber and extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia. That Annette would choose to dedicate her time and service to such a worthy cause would come at no surprise to her professors or her classmates. She is known by all as a passionate advocate for the marginalized. At USC, Annette co-founded the Critical Legal Studies Association, and we have the current president here today, Amadi, a student-led organization that explores the law's intersection with race, gender, and sexuality. Annette was also active in the Faculty Diversity Initiative's push to hire the first full-time Asian American professor, a tenure professor at USC Law. And as a 3L, she received the Edward S. and Eleanor J. Shattuck Award, symbolizing her classmates' vote of confidence in her that she would become an outstanding member of the bar. Annette is a driven, passionate, and caring individual who seeks to be the change that she wants to see in the world. The world would be a better place with more people like Annette. Annette was one of my first friends at USC, a kindred spirit, and a colleague. And so it's with extreme pleasure that I ask you to join me in welcoming her now.
Thank you, Sony and Jen, for that very warm introduction. I want to begin with a few words about Spirit of the Law and what it meant to me during law school. So I'm going to make a series of confessions today. And my first is that I had a really hard time in law school. In my first year especially. I felt a bit like I was becoming a law robot, where the things that I cared about and which brought me to law school in the first place weren't the same things I now had to stuff into my head and spit back in a 3-hour exam. Raise your hand if you kind of feel that way. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. The other problem for me was that there were a lot of shoulds in law school. You should go to office hours. You should make law review. You should consider clerking. You should, this is the most important one, you should land a big firm job after your second summer of OCI. And if not, you should apply for fellowships to do public service or volunteer with the PD or DA's office so that you can land a job after graduation. That's a lot of shoulds. And I remember attending Professor Garrett's Spirit of the Law talk, where he spoke from his heart about his family, meeting his wife, his time at divinity school, and what inspired him to study and eventually teach law. And I just remember feeling so grateful to be in a space where it wasn't about what one should or shouldn't do, but about what one could do, the possibilities given one's opportunities. So I'd like to say a big thank you to Dean Sony, Jen, the Levin Institute, Sherry, the Office of Religious Life, and everybody who makes this series possible for helping law students see the human side of the profession and the opportunities that a law degree can create. So now I'm going to make confession number 2, which is that I really have no idea what I'm doing with my career, despite Jen's introduction, which makes it seem like I do. I really don't. And I share this for 2 reasons. First, as a disclaimer, this is a series designed for individuals to share how the personal and the professional come together. And I have to say, when I was talking to Jen and brainstorming ideas for what I might talk about today, I was telling her that there really hasn't been a whole lot of professional, given that I just had my degree conferred in May. But this brings me to my second reason for wanting to share this confession with you, which is that I think in law school, we often hear from people who appear to have it all together, whose biographies read like a string of successes in an upward, victorious trajectory. So I'd like to take this time to talk about uncertainty and what it feels like to be in an uncertain position. Uncertainty is scary. It's messy. And not knowing what's next is daunting. Those of you who are currently law students or who've been following the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, which have both put out numerous articles about the demise of some golden era of big law jobs or how law schools are failing their students, will know that this is a scary time to be a law student. But I think how we face uncertainty and perceived setbacks can tell us a lot about ourselves. So what I'm going to do first is tell you a little bit about myself, and then touch on two specific setbacks that have helped me work through what to do in this period of uncertainty. So one of my favorite books is Milan Kundera's Unbearable Lightness of Being. Has anyone here also read it? Okay, Dean Sony. In the book, Kundera speaks about the way in which we create motifs or themes in our lives, which are shaped by the people we encounter and the experiences that we have when we're young. Granted, this is about lovers, but I promise it's applicable here. I think part of the process of deciding how to move forward in the face of uncertainty involves being introspective or looking inwards and seeing how the dots connect when you look back. And it's not just some linear thing, because some dots might look a little blippy, a little bit out of place, like maybe you think, what am I doing here in law school? But I think what it comes down to is how you interpret and make sense of the whole constellation of things that you've done. And I think what helps you do that is to think about the kinds of motifs there are in your own life. So for me, although I was born here in Los Angeles, I grew up in Beijing and Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, where I spent my formative years, I attended British schools. But it was there that I began creating some of the foundational motifs that I carry with me to this day. So I grew up as an Asian American in Asia at a British school. This was the perfect storm for an early identity crisis. While I'm thankful for the education I received, there are things about being Asian American in Asia in a British school that were problematic. To give you an example, one of my most vivid memories is that in elementary school, we had, each year we covered some sort of topical theme. And it was usually Anglo-centric and about the triumph of England over the world. So first there was the Industrial Revolution, where leaps and bounds of progress were made in manufacturing for mankind. And then there was the Royal Air Force's victories in World War II. But this one year, I think it was about 4th grade, it was the Victorians. So the school sponsored a Victorian Day where we came to school dressed as little Victorians. We had little chimney sweeps and girls in little frilly frocks. And I remember this vividly because at home, my mother keeps a lot of my stuff. And one of the things she has preserved at home is this book of all the work that I did that year in 4th grade about the Victorians. And on the cover of that book is a sepia-toned picture, to look old, of all these unsmiling 9-year-olds trying really hard to look Victorian. And it sounds kind of cute until you take a moment to think about it and you realize that 200 years ago, no one in your family had any reason, 1, to be in a photo, or 2, to dress anything like that. That's what your colonizers looked like. So this was also coupled with the fact that we weren't allowed to speak any other language than English in our class, and even during break times. So from a young age, I began to feel like there was something incongruous about what I was being taught in law school and how I myself identified or saw the world. And my mother tried really hard to counteract this by putting me into language schools. If you have immigrant parents or have ever endured a Saturday in a language school, you know that this is not always effective. And I think this is because what you learn in school is often viewed as authoritative. And the fact that I saw so little of my own language or culture or history in my early education planted a seed for what would become really important to me in the years to come. That is, the importance of not only knowing one's identity and culture and history, but also seeing it reflected in the so-called authoritative or official channels. Excuse me. Over time, this seed has manifested itself in different ways. For one, I majored in history and international studies when I was in college, with a focus on Asia. And my mother once noted with irony the fact that it took me leaving Asia to go to America to learn Asian history. But the fact of the matter is, I wanted to set the record straight, to better understand the region that I came from. And I think what drew me to the history major was that the study of it involved understanding the same event from a variety of different angles, creating a critical history instead of accepting some sort of official party line. And the writing of a critical history comports with a sense of doing justice to any lived event. In fact, the phrase "to do justice to something or someone," and this is something I looked up this morning on online etymologydictionary.com, so I don't know if it's quite accurate, but the phrase "to do justice to something or someone" meant in the 1670s to render fully and fairly, showing due appreciation. So to some extent, this ties into the work that I ended up doing in Cambodia, in the sense that truth and reconciliation commissions and international tribunals, to a more limited extent, strive to do just that, to give the events of mass atrocities their due accounting. Secondly, race and identity have been central to the work I've done in my academic work and in my extracurriculars. When I was a student, I wrote a note for the Review of Law and Social Justice about the challenges that limited English proficiency individuals face in our court system, and the work that I did with the Critical Legal Studies Association and Faculty Diversity Initiative in helping hire an Asian American law professor also stemmed from the belief that an education should be holistic, diverse, and further critical thinking, even about something as established as the law. So to bring this back to law school, I have a third confession to make. And if you're keeping track, this is confession number 3 and setback number 1. I really wanted to go to UCLA. I know, hey, what a traitor. UCLA has a critical race studies program, of which Dean Soni is an alumni, which I thought would perfectly fit the kind of stuff I thought and cared about. But the acceptances just didn't work out that way. I share this with you because it was a lesson for me in what to do when things don't go as planned. If there's something you really care about, you don't need a specific institution to help you better understand it. Once I knew I was coming to SC, I researched which professors wrote in the areas of race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality, and took note that these would be good professors to get to know. And that maybe, if a group of us were to show enough interest in these issues, we could create a similar space in which these topics could be discussed, which is exactly what happened my first year of law school. A group of us in my section, after we had covered Margaret Montoya's Mascaras y Trenzas in our LLB class, felt like we needed to create a space where we could continue discussing the way in which the law intersected with race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality. And now time for setback number 2. By the time 3L rolled around, I still hadn't secured employment. And for those of you who are currently 2 or 3Ls facing this situation, you know it can be quite devastating. But take heart, it wasn't the end of the world. And in fact, it allowed me to consider options I hadn't previously thought about. Furthermore, because I wasn't pre-committed to a certain practice area, I felt free to take classes that I was genuinely interested in. And one of these classes was Professor Gary's International Criminal Law class. Although I wasn't part of the Human Rights Clinic, I had actually applied as a second year, but I hadn't been accepted and it hadn't worked out. But that didn't matter. I was still interested in learning about the development of international criminal courts because the history nerd in me wanted to learn about how some of the most heinous crimes in history were dealt with by the international community. And as you know, atrocity crimes like genocide are often targeted at individuals on the basis of their identities. And the international community's work to end impunity for these crimes was a topic that I was interested in. Through the class, I was fortunate to get to know Professor Gary better. And when she learned about an opening with the Supreme Court chamber at the courts in Cambodia, its actual name is Extraordinary Chambers in the Courts of Cambodia, which is really unwieldy, and people often say ECCC, dropping the last C because they can't. ECCC is a mouthful. And so she encouraged me to apply, and it all worked out. Going to Cambodia and working for the International Tribunal will be one of these things I look back on in the course of not only my legal career, but also my life, and think that I'm really glad that I got to go. While at the chamber, I had the occasion to work with judges from all over the world, not only national judges from Cambodia, but also judges from Poland, Zambia, and Sri Lanka, as well as legal officers from all over the world, on 2 decisions in particular. The first was a decision concerning allegations that the Prime Minister of Cambodia had interfered with the trial of brother number 2, or Nguyen Cha. And the second decision, which is still currently being written, was about the trial chamber's decision to release Ng Thirith, who was a former social action minister of the Democratic Kampuchea regime, because she was deemed no longer fit to stand trial. She's an elderly woman who was diagnosed with dementia, and the trial chamber decided that she was no longer able to proceed in the case against her. I also had the opportunity to travel through the country, and during the Q&A section, I'm going to loop some of the pictures that I took while I was there. And I learned a lot, not just about Cambodian history and its people, but also about myself and how lucky we all are to live in a system which, despite its flaws, respects rule of law. In particular, my time at the tribunal underscored the importance that the defense plays, or defense rights play, in maintaining the integrity of the justice system as a whole. Now, international tribunals are often seen as carrying out selective justice or victor's justice, or being highly political in nature. And so the defense plays an integral role in ensuring that accused persons are judged on the law and not on the basis of some external factors like political bias. Furthermore, in a country like Cambodia, where the International Tribunal is looked to as a way to build capacity, in the sense that it's looked to as a way to help train domestic lawyers and judges, it's crucial to ensure that foundational principles are upheld, like the presumption of innocence, the separation of the executive from the judiciary. And this is really important, especially because the Cambodian judiciary has been susceptible to influence from the executive branch. As an example, while I was there, the domestic court sentenced a local radio broadcaster to 20 years in jail on the allegation that he was inciting rebellion in this one province where they had an issue with land grabbing. What had happened was this broadcaster, who was kind of known for having the one radio station that was, courageous enough to criticize the Prime Minister, had aired a report about the fact that these villagers who were protesting the grabbing of their land had filed a complaint with the International Criminal Court. But he was put into jail for 20 years, and it's important to also note that he was jailed 2 times previously for allegations that he had defamed the Prime Minister. So you can see how the executive kind of has its hand all over what happens in the courts, which is kind of unfathomable to us here in the US. So back to setbacks. I think there are ways to redeem setbacks by continuing to pursue the things you're interested in and by being open to new experiences. I recently read on Jen's recommendation Tiny Beautiful Things by Cheryl Strayed, who was an advice columnist for the Rumpus and wrote this column called Dear Sugar. So readers write in and they kind of like spill their guts to her, and then she writes back. And the book is a collection of these excerpts. And one of the readers of her column wrote in and asked, Dear Sugar, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self? And Sugar responds, and she says to her 20-year-old self that she should build a life and not a career. And I think these are good words to live by, and I hope serve as an encouragement to put your career and law degree in the context of what gives your life purpose and meaning. And I encourage all of you to take stock of all the dots in your life, those that have come before and those that present themselves as opportunities later, to decide what kind of art best suits your best vision for yourself. And that's all I have. So I'm going to loop some pictures and then we're open for questions. Questions? So that's incorrect, and that's me typing diligently. Me too.
What are you planning to do now?
That's a question I don't know.
Sorry.
I'm doing a lot of soul searching. I'm really not sure. I think I'm just going to cast my net wide and just remind myself that a friend of mine in college once told me that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom, and I had no idea what she meant, but it turned out that she was quoting Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard. And the point is that anxiety can either paralyze us or it can motivate us to do something with ourselves. And I think the fact that we're lost in this, we have so many. I might have just botched Kierkegaard. Sorry, Dean Sony's looking at me quizzically. But I think for me that quote, "Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom," means that I think we feel anxious because we have choice. We have free will to decide what comes next. I think I'm taking this opportunity to think of this period of uncertainty as being liberating and freeing, and I want to explore what's out there, and that might involve casting my resume in all sorts of directions and seeing what sticks, but purposefully in the sense that I want to be able to think about more deliberately what happens next instead of just plunging headlong in the first thing that comes along.
Can you talk about being in Cambodia in this day and age, in light of the genocide that happened in the 70s by the Khmer Rouge? Where is the country at in terms of, are there formal reconciliation kind of tribunals like we saw in South Africa and we're beginning to see in Rwanda? What were your own personal experiences in trying to reconcile the aftermath and history of the genocide?
So that's a great question. When I first arrived, this was really, I was kind of taken aback by this. I got into a taxi, and this was literally after I had just landed, and I was talking to the taxi driver about why I'd come to Phnom Penh, And I told him, I'm working for the court. And the first thing he said to me was, the court's corrupt. And I was like, oh no, I just signed up to work here for 3 months. What do you mean the court's corrupt? But those of you who've read about the extraordinary chambers know that it's faced a lot of difficulties in the sense that there are a lot of allegations that investigations haven't been able to proceed as planned because the Khmer Rouge is kind of all up and down the current regime also. And so attempts to probe further might implicate more people and just things that people don't want to uncover. So so there's that problem. And I think a lot of the people who are in Cambodia feel like the court hasn't done enough. And I think this is a problem about international tribunals in general, is that you can't really, it's hard to account for everybody. And so there are a lot of groups that wanted to, for example, make sure that sexual violence crimes were more kind of pertinent on the court's radar, but because of the way that the tribunal was established, because of the law that was set up in terms of this theory of joint criminal enterprise, it was very hard to incorporate specific acts of rape when it wasn't part of a larger plan or system. So I think, like from a lay perspective, it might seem like the court hasn't done enough, but for those of us who know the law, it's very difficult for a tribunal to kind of also encompass all the demands of a population that wants to see justice. But there are other organizations, like the Documentary Center of Cambodia, that try to bring to light some of these grave crimes. And the tribunal itself attempts to play that historical role. For instance, the Supreme Court, while I was there, also declassified a number of documents about what was happening in the regime, and I think that was really important that people could have access to those documents in the future. I can keep talking. When they released Ingtharit, who's the elderly lady you see and me sitting behind, there was quite a lot of uproar in the local community because the tribunal has indicted very few people as it is. There was only one judgment which was released actually this year, which Professor Gary's clinic worked extensively on. And then there are currently 4 people on trial, but then Ingtharit was released, so then there's 3, which brings it to a total of 4 people who stood trial, which is kind of like really small in comparison to the ICTY or ICTR. So when she was released, I think the local community felt like this was also, a symbol that the court wasn't doing its job. But in fact, upholding international humanitarian law or international standards of law required that somebody who has Alzheimer's or dementia, who can't understand the proceedings against herself, not be forced to stand trial, because that just violates all sorts of fundamental guarantees of fair trial rights. So seeing that kind of discrepancy and understanding that there are these international standards that sometimes weren't exactly translated to the local population in terms of understanding why it was that somebody who had so much blood on her hands was able to essentially be released into the community. But I think the court tries to kind of translate that difference between the law and then the people who are looking at this court and thinking, well, what are you doing? By having a lot of public affairs education, and they often have different people from the population from different villages bust in to see the courts. There's actually a specific Q&A section dedicated to the issue of why this individual accused person was released. So I think the court tries to bridge that gap by being very purposeful and mindful about how it communicates to the public at large. Question?
Yeah, I was just wondering about young people and their role in the legal system in Cambodia, and are they invested in it, and what is legal training like for those who want to practice law in Cambodia? What is the legal training like? What is the system?
I can't speak too closely to it because I'm actually not sure how their own training works, but I can say that there is an interest in what happened in the past. I think there isn't, everyone's family literally in some way was affected by the atrocities in the 70s. So they all have an understanding of it, but I also think that perhaps they haven't learned the full extent of what happened, because I don't know that their textbooks reflect, the full extent of what happened. And I think, it's a really hard thing for people to talk about. So I think what they do hear from their family kind of comes out in drips and drabs. In terms of the training they receive, I'm really not sure how their own lawyers are trained, but hopefully the hope is that for the lawyers who work with the court, so that the court is comprised as a hybrid court, so you have half of the staff, pretty much more or less, being national, like administrators, as well as lawyers and judges. Actually, there's a little bit of a majority of Cambodian judges, but the idea is that hopefully by having the international tribunal there, these principles and norms will kind of filter down to the rest of the population. Quiet crowd.
I have a friend who went to Cambodia in the early 90s, and when she got there, there were only 5 or 6 public defenders in the entire country, partly because in the aftermath of the genocide, much of the intellectual, educated, academic demographic were executed. And so she went about sort of trying to build this community of public defenders and training them in rule of law, whereby they didn't use torture, custodial torture as an interrogation device. Now her work has expanded all over Asia. What's the state of the law in Cambodia? And this kind of dovetails on the last question a little bit, in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the courts, the lawyers. What's the process there now that we're further out?
About public defenders. So I went to this conference while I was there, and it was called The Legacy of the ECCC, which is kind of funny because it hasn't really finished its work yet, but it was talking about its impact on the local community. At the conference, there was a defense lawyer for one of the accused in the tribunal, and he was talking about how when he was first assigned to defend, I don't remember if he was Q Samphan or Nguyen Chava, one of the big guys. When he was assigned to defend one of these big defendants, he was receiving death threats. And people were calling him and harassing him and just questioning, why is it that you've chosen to defend somebody, one of the biggest mass criminals in our generation. And so I think it's still kind of difficult for some people to wrap their heads around the notion that even people who are the most despised, lowest of the low, also deserve representation in court. And so it seems like that might still be kind of an issue. With regards to the system itself, there's still a lot of shortfalls. I'm not exactly an expert on this, but also during the conference, we heard from judges who were saying that there was a need for even basic things like the presumption of innocence to be firmly established. And I think in the case of this radio broadcaster that I mentioned earlier, for the executive to kind of just drum up some charges that, because he doesn't like that this guy is making a lot of fuss on the radio, it's still a problem that these guarantees aren't in place. Another issue that was brought up by actually a young lawyer who was at this conference was that even having access to reasoned, published decisions, we have Westlaw and Lexis, which I certainly realize that we should not take for granted when I was working at this tribunal. They couldn't access former decisions because they weren't published or they weren't given in a way that was fully fleshed out. And so you had no idea why things were happening as they did. So these are things that I think the government and the tribunal will hopefully be able to partner with to work on in the future.
Question? I often wait, so you might have said it, but what were your responsibilities in the 3 months that you were
So I worked with in particular, I worked with one judge. I got assignments from different legal officers, but it was primarily one judge who was helping me get my assignments, and I was primarily doing a lot of research and writing and drafting of opinions, and also things like checking footnotes and all that fun stuff.
So I take it that the extraordinary chambers are separate from Cambodia's own national legal system, is that right?
Technically, they're extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia, but the way that the law applies is quite separate from the domestic law. I mean, they apply Cambodian law in the sense that they look at Cambodian penal code and the civil code, but they aren't like, it isn't like a appellate level of review within the tribunal itself. They have a pretrial chamber, a trial chamber, and a Supreme Court chamber, so it's kind of self-contained in that respect.
And were there conflicts of law between international human rights law? Is that what you guys are primarily using? Cambodian law, is that sometimes difficult?
I can't think of any specific examples, but I think what I realized is that international law, if you've taken it, it's quite fluid. So I felt like there were a lot of, and Cambodia is a civil law system, and so you don't have to rely as heavily on precedent. It's more about interpreting statutes, and so interpreting statutes with the guidance of international human rights law, or international criminal law, which ends up taking all sorts of forms. Yes?
Just a question about living there, not so much about your
Yeah, sure.
Was it a little, what was your impression living there? Because here it is like a country that's still recovering, that's still dealing with what happened, yet it's now one of the top tourist destinations. And Western, like people are coming from all over for the beaches and like, for some culture, and just kind of the dichotomy of all these people are here as tourists, yet the country's still trying to deal with their history.
Yeah, that's a great question. In terms of where I was living, I was actually living right, so in terms of like genocide and tourism, I was living actually right behind the Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it was a former school that was turned into a torture center. And it was kind of bizarre to me. I mean, at first, it sounds a lot grimmer than it was, because after a while you kind of get used to the fact that you're living behind this former torture center, which is sad, but I think it's a reality that over time it's possible to just kind of get accustomed to the fact that you're here and that all these awful things happen. But I think it's important for tourists to also see that this kind of history happened. So I would walk down the street and the Genocide Museum would be there, and you would just see like a lot of tourists there. And I think that's a good thing, that tourists also make a stop to visit the Genocide Museum, and also there are the killing fields. Some of these pictures are from the killing fields, which are just mass graves. And I think they serve an educational role in terms of giving people insight into what can happen if impunity isn't ended for things like this. But it is kind of weird to think, all these people are going to Angkor Wat, and do they understand the full extent of what's going on? And also, the locals, I think, on the one hand, I think Cambodians are very proud that now their country is opening up and developing, but I think they also want people to know that this is a crucial part of their history.
Well, please join me in thanking Annette Wong.